Hello, I'm really glad you're here tonight. This hour is different from the rest of the day. It doesn't ask you to decide anything. It doesn't ask you to perform or explain or keep up. It simply invites you to lie still and let your thoughts move at their own pace. As the years pass, nighttime becomes a kind of companion, a place where the mind is free to wander without interruption, where memories return, not urgently, but patiently, where understanding settles in quietly, without needing words. Later in life, the mind doesn't race the way it once did. It reflects, it revisits, it connects dots that once seemed unrelated. And it does this most honestly when the lights are off and the world has gone silent. This space is for those thoughts, the ones that don't surface during the day, the ones that arrive only when you're alone with yourself, resting, remembering, and gently making sense of a long, lived-in life. So take a slow breath. Let your body soften into the bed and allow this night to meet you where you are. And now, before we begin, if this kind of honest, gentle reflection speaks to you, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. And down in the comments, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. There's something comforting about knowing we're all here together, scattered across time zones, but united in these late hours when the world finally grows still. So settle in, adjust your pillows, find a comfortable position, and know that for the next hour, you're not alone in whatever wisdom you're carrying, whatever understanding you've earned, whatever truths rise to the surface when the lights go out. Let's begin. Tonight is about forgiveness, not the kind that requires a conversation, not the kind that needs an apology first, or a confrontation, or a long overdue phone call that you've been putting off for years. Not the kind that demands anything of anyone else at all. Tonight is about the forgiveness that happens in silence, in the dark, in the quiet space between waking and sleep, when the noise of the world finally stops and you are left alone with the truest, most honest version of yourself. You've been carrying things. You know that. You've been carrying them for a long time. Some of them are heavy. Some of them have become so familiar that you barely notice the weight anymore. They've become part of how you walk through the world, part of how you hold your shoulders, part of the tension that lives in your jaw at the end of every day when you finally lie down and let yourself rest. But tonight, you don't have to carry them. Not for this hour, not in this space. Tonight, you're allowed to set them down gently beside this bed, not to abandon them, not to pretend they don't exist, just to rest without them for a little while, to breathe without them pressing against your chest. Because here's something you've probably started to understand. In the way that only comes with time and experience and the accumulation of many years lived carefully and imperfectly and humanly. Forgiveness isn't something that happens to you from the outside. It's something that grows inside you quietly, in the moments when you stop resisting it, in the moments when you're tired enough to let down your guard, in the moments when the night is still and the defenses you've built so carefully over the years finally soften. Those moments happen here, in bed, in the dark, in exactly the kind of silence you're in right now. So let's begin there. beginning of the idea of forgiveness itself. You were taught somewhere along the way that forgiveness was a transaction, something exchanged between two people. Someone wrongs you. They apologize. You forgive them. Both parties feel better. The ledger is balanced. Life moves on cleanly. But life, as you've discovered, doesn't work that neatly. The people who hurt you most haven't always apologized. Some of them never will. Some of them don't believe they did anything wrong. Some of them are gone now, moved away, or estranged, or dead. And the chance for that transaction has passed permanently. The ledger will never be balanced the way you were taught it should be. And so you've carried it, the unresolved thing, the unapologized for wound, the damage that was done without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without the other person ever seeming to understand what they took from you. You've carried it through decades, through other relationships, other experiences, other versions of yourself. You've carried it into rooms and conversations and quiet evenings and moments of joy that should have been uncomplicated but weren't, because this old unresolved thing was there underneath, coloring everything slightly darker than it needed to be. You've probably gotten very good at ignoring it during the day. During the day, there are things to do, people to see, problems to solve. The momentum of ordinary life keeps you moving forward, and forward-moving people don't have time to look at what they're dragging behind them. But the night is different. The night slows everything down. The night has a way of surfacing what the day suppresses. And so here, in this bed, in this silence, the old things rise. The old names, the old faces, the old moments that still carry a charge after all these years. You know the ones. You don't even have to think hard to find them. They're already there, aren't they? Already at the edges of your awareness, already present in the room with you, the way they always are when the lights go out. You're not going to fight them tonight. You're not going to push them back down the way you sometimes do. Tonight, you're going to look at them, gently, curiously, with the kind of compassion that you might offer a tired old stranger who's been sitting outside your door for years, waiting to be let in. Because maybe that's what these old wounds are. Not enemies, not threats, not proof that you are weak or foolish or too trusting. Just tired old pieces of your story, waiting to be seen, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting for you to stop running long enough to look at them and say, yes, that happened, that was real, and I am still here. Let's go back, not to the beginning of everything, but to the beginning of the hurt. There was someone who didn't protect you when they should have. Maybe a parent, maybe someone who was supposed to be a parent, but failed spectacularly at the job. Someone who had the responsibility of keeping you safe and warm and convinced that the world was fundamentally trustworthy, and who did not meet that responsibility. Not on purpose, perhaps, not out of cruelty necessarily, but through their own damage, their own limitations, their own inability to give what they'd never received themselves. You knew, even as a child, that something was wrong. Children always know. They may not have the words for it. They may not understand the adult dynamics at play, but they feel the temperature of a home. They feel when safety is absent. They feel when love has conditions attached to it, or when it arrives inconsistently, or when it's used as a tool for control, rather than offered freely as a gift. You felt that, and you adapted to it the way children adapt to everything, with astonishing flexibility and creativity. You learned what behaviors kept the peace. You learned which version of yourself was safest to show. You learned to be small or loud or agreeable or invisible, depending on what the environment required of you in any given moment. And then you grew up and took those adaptations with you. They stopped being survival strategies and became personality traits. The people-pleasing that protected you at 8 became exhaustion at 40. The emotional distance that insulated you at 12 became loneliness at 50. The hypervigilance that kept you safe at 15 became anxiety at 60 that you couldn't quite explain or name or trace back to its origin. You've spent years, perhaps decades, trying to untangle which parts of yourself are genuinely you and which parts are simply the scar tissue of old wounds. This is extraordinarily difficult work. It requires an honesty that hurts. It requires looking at people you loved and acknowledging that they also harmed you. It requires holding two truths at once. This person was important to me, and this person caused damage that I'm still quietly repairing. Tonight, in the silence, you can hold both those truths without having to do anything about them, without having to make a decision or reach a conclusion or forgive anyone by a particular deadline. You can just hold them. You can feel the weight of both. You can acknowledge that each one is fully real. That person who didn't protect you. You've thought about them over the years. You've oscillated between anger and grief and guilt and a complicated tenderness that you didn't ask for and can't entirely explain. You've probably rehearsed conversations with them in your head, things you'd say if you could, questions you'd ask if you believed you'd get honest answers. Maybe you had some of those conversations in real life. Maybe they went well. Maybe they went terribly. Maybe they taught you that some people are simply never going to understand the impact they had, no matter how clearly or carefully or compassionately you explain it. Maybe those conversations left you more hurt than before, which is its own specific kind of grief. Or maybe you never had those conversations at all. Maybe the person was gone before you could. Maybe you decided the risk wasn't worth the cost. Maybe you're still waiting for the right moment that never quite arrives, that keeps moving just ahead of you like a horizon. Tonight is not about that conversation. Tonight is about something that can happen entirely within you, without their participation, without their awareness, without their cooperation or their understanding or their change. Tonight is about the possibility that you can release the charge from that old wound without needing anything from them at all. Not because what they did was acceptable. Not because it didn't matter. Not because the hurt wasn't real or serious or lasting. But because you deserve to not be in pain anymore. Because you've been punished enough by what happened to you. Because the wound they gave you has already taken years from your peace of mind, and years is enough. More than enough. It has always been more than enough. Breathe for a moment. Really breathe. Slowly. Feel the air moving into your lungs and out again. Notice how your body knows how to do this without any effort from you. Notice how your heart keeps beating, steady and faithful, night after night, year after year, regardless of what you've been carrying. Your body has been on your side this whole time, even when you haven't been on your own side, even when you've been unkind to yourself, or neglectful of yourself, or quietly convinced that you deserved the pain. Your body kept going. It kept breathing. It kept healing what it could heal. It has been remarkably, stubbornly loyal to you. Now think about someone else who hurt you, not the deepest wound. You'll return to that later. Someone in the middle distance, a friend who betrayed your confidence and then acted as though nothing had happened. A colleague who took credit for your work and faced no consequences while you swallowed your anger alone. A sibling who chose sides and whose side was never yours. A person you loved who left without adequate explanation, who disappeared from your life and left a silence where they used to be. You remember the specific moment of the hurt, probably with a clarity that surprises you even after all this time. The body stores these moments differently than ordinary memories. They have a texture to them, a temperature. You can be lying in bed decades later and suddenly feel that moment in your chest as though it just happened an hour ago. That vividness doesn't mean you haven't healed. It just means the moment mattered. It means you were invested. It means you had opened yourself up enough to be truly hurt, which means you were truly present in that relationship, which means it was real, which means you weren't wrong to trust or to love or to expect better. You weren't wrong to expect better. That's important. When someone hurts you, one of the cruelest secondary injuries is the doubt that creeps in afterward. The voice that asks whether you were naive, whether you should have seen it coming, whether your trust was foolish. This voice is not your wisdom. This voice is the wound talking. Wisdom would never blame you for having an open heart. Wisdom would never punish you for showing up fully in a relationship and being let down by another person's failure to do the same. Your expectations were not unreasonable. Loyalty between friends is reasonable. Professional honesty is reasonable. Sibling solidarity is reasonable. Love that doesn't disappear without explanation is reasonable. You were right to expect those things. The failure was theirs. The responsibility was theirs. The damage was done by them, not caused by you. But here's where it gets complicated. And here is where silence is helpful. Because in the quiet of the night, with no one to perform for, with no audience for your grievance, you can ask the harder question. Not whether you were right to be hurt. You were. But whether your continued pain is serving you. Whether holding this wound open is protecting you from something, or simply extending your suffering into years and decades that deserved better from you. You know people who wear their old wounds like armor. Maybe you've been one of those people at certain points in your life. You understand the logic of it. If you stay hurt, you stay alert. If you stay angry, you stay defended. The pain functions as a kind of warning system, as proof that you learned from what happened, as evidence that you won't let it happen again. But armor is heavy, and it doesn't actually prevent new wounds. It just makes you slower and more exhausted and less open to the connections that might genuinely heal you. Armor keeps out what you fear, but it also keeps out what you need. There's a difference between learning from pain and being imprisoned by it. There's a difference between healthy caution and building walls so high that no one can get close enough to matter. You've probably watched that distinction play out in your own life. Watched yourself hold someone at arm's length who deserved better. Watched yourself withhold trust from someone who had genuinely earned it because you'd given it before to someone who hadn't. This is one of the subtler injustices of being hurt. The people who hurt you are gone, or changed, or indifferent. But the impact of what they did lingers in every new relationship you enter. They're not in those new relationships, but their damage is. And the new people in your life have to negotiate with a shadow they didn't cast, a coldness they didn't cause, a distance they can't understand and that you can't fully explain. That's not fair to you or to them. The person lying in this bed right now, under these covers, in this quiet room, has been shaped by everything that's happened to them. You know that. You're not naive about it, but you are allowed to decide that some of those shapes no longer serve you. You are allowed to gently, patiently reshape yourself, not by pretending the past didn't happen, but by choosing deliberately which parts of it still get to have power over you going forward. Forgiveness is one of those choices. It's a decision made in silence, a decision to withdraw the power you've unconsciously given to people who no longer deserve to hold it, not for their sake, for yours, only and entirely for yours. Think about the energy you've spent on one particular person who hurt you. Calculate it honestly over the years. The mental rehearsals of what you should have said. The imagined arguments you've won after the fact. The fantasies of vindication, of them finally understanding, finally acknowledging what they did. The times their face has appeared in your thoughts, uninvited and disrupted an otherwise peaceful moment. The times you've described what they did to someone else and felt the anger or the grief return to its full original intensity, as though no time had passed at all, as though the wound were brand new. That is your energy, your mental real estate, your emotional bandwidth, and they've been living in it rent-free for years, perhaps for decades, while they, presumably, go about their lives without giving you a second thought, while they sleep peacefully in their own beds tonight, entirely unaware of how much of your inner life they still occupy, entirely unaffected by your pain, entirely untouched by the suffering you've carried on their behalf. There's something almost painfully clear about that when you see it directly, and the night allows you to see it clearly. In the silence, without distraction, without the mercy of noise or busyness to blur the picture, the truth becomes visible. You've been giving something precious and irreplaceable to someone who neither earned it nor deserves it. You've been paying a debt that was never yours to pay. Nocturnal forgiveness begins with this recognition, not with warmth, not with sudden understanding or generous compassion, just with this simple, clear-eyed acknowledgement. Your continued suffering does not punish them. It was never reaching them. It has always only been reaching you. Let that settle. Really let it sit. Let it move through you the way a slow breath moves through a tired body. Your pain does not punish the person who caused it. It only punishes you. It has only ever punished you. The question becomes then, not whether to forgive, which may still feel impossible from where you're lying tonight, but whether you're willing to stop hurting yourself on their behalf, whether you're willing to redirect the energy you've spent on them towards something that actually serves your life, whether you're willing to take back the mental and emotional space they've occupied without your permission and fill it with something worthy of you. That's a different question than forgiveness, isn't it? It doesn't require you to feel warmly toward them. It doesn't require you to pretend the harm wasn't real or serious or lasting. It doesn't require any contact or confrontation or reconciliation. It simply requires you to look at the cost clearly and decide quietly in the privacy of this night that you are no longer willing to keep paying it. You've been paying it long enough. You've paid it in sleepless nights and low-grade anxiety and a weariness that exhausts you before the day has even properly begun. You've paid it in joy that was never quite uncomplicated and trust that was never quite unconditional and love that was never quite unheld. You've been paying it, and tonight is where the payment stops. Not perfectly, not completely, not in one night, but begins to stop. Because forgiveness is never sudden. It's a slow process, more like the turning of a season than the flipping of a switch. But it starts somewhere. And tonight, in this silence, in this bed, in this dark room that the rest of the world knows nothing about, is exactly where it can begin. Now let's talk about the forgiveness you owe yourself, because that's the harder one. That's the one that really keeps people awake at 3 a.m. when all the other distractions have gone quiet. That's the one hiding underneath all the other grudges and grievances and old stories about other people. The forgiveness directed not outward, but inward, toward the person you've been hardest on your entire life without ever quite admitting it. You've done things you regret. Of course you have. You've lived long enough and fully enough and humanly enough that you've made real mistakes, not theoretical ones, not minor social embarrassments that fade in a week. Real mistakes, the kind that had consequences, the kind that affected people you cared about, the kind you can trace to specific moments, specific choices, specific words you said or didn't say, specific actions you took or failed to take when action was what was needed. You remember them. They come to you in the night, these particular memories. They surface without invitation, sharp and specific, and suddenly you're back there, in that moment, making that choice, saying that thing, watching yourself do something you knew, even as you did it, that you would someday regret, and regretting it anyway. Maybe you hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Maybe you were careless with someone who trusted you completely and deserved that trust to be honored. Maybe you were cruel in a moment of your own pain, and the cruelty landed on someone innocent, someone who was simply nearby when you were struggling, who became the target for something that had nothing to do with them. Maybe you chose yourself when you should have chosen someone else. Or maybe you abandoned yourself repeatedly when you should have chosen yourself, and the self-abandonment had its own long trail of damage. Maybe you were a version of your parents that you swore you would never become. Maybe you saw it happening and couldn't stop it. Maybe you only recognized it in hindsight years later, which is somehow worse. To know that you were repeating patterns you recognized and hated, and still, in the moment, could not escape. These memories come at night. They surface in the silence. They always have. And you meet them the same way every time, with a verdict already rendered before the trial begins. Guilty. Unforgivably so. Sentenced to revisit this particular moment indefinitely without possibility of release. But who is the judge delivering that sentence? Who appointed them to the bench? What authority do they actually carry? Because when you look closely at the voice that prosecutes you in the small hours, you may notice it doesn't sound like justice at all. It sounds like punishment for punishment's sake. It sounds like a voice that has no interest in your growth, or your healing, or your becoming a better person going forward. A voice interested only in ensuring you never forget, never rest, never have a single night of true peace. That voice is not your conscience. A healthy conscience points to a mistake, helps you understand it, motivates you to repair what can be repaired, and then lets you go. It serves growth. It moves forward. What comes at 3 a.m. is not that. What comes at 3 a.m. is your own accumulated pain turned inward, in the absence of a better target. And it deserves the same question you asked about the pain directed outward. Is this serving you? Is this making you better? Or is this simply extending your suffering into a future that has done nothing to deserve being punished for your past? You made real mistakes. You know that. You carry that knowledge every day without needing to be reminded of it in the dark. But you made those mistakes as a person who was doing the best they could with what they had at the time, with the emotional vocabulary they'd been given, which may have been limited, with the self-awareness they'd developed by that point, which was necessarily incomplete, with the healing they'd managed to do, which was real, but not yet enough. You didn't make those mistakes as the person you are tonight. You made them as an earlier version of yourself, a version with less experience, less understanding, fewer tools, more unprocessed pain, less capacity to see clearly what you can see clearly now. And it is genuinely unfair. It is a particular cruelty to judge that earlier self by the standards of who you've become since then. To hold a younger, less healed, less aware version of yourself accountable to a wisdom you hadn't yet earned. You are not that person anymore. That is not a small thing. That is everything. You are not that person anymore. That is not a small thing. That is everything. Sit with that for a moment. Don't rush past it. Don't deflect it with another round of self-criticism or qualify it with a list of all the ways you still fall short. Just let it be true for a moment. You are not the person who made those mistakes. You have changed. You have grown. You have done work on yourself that was painful and slow and often invisible to everyone around you. And that work has made you genuinely, substantively different from who you were. The problem with internal change is that it doesn't come with a certificate. No one hands you formal documentation confirming that the growth was real, that it counts, that you've served enough of the sentence you assigned yourself. You have to decide that for yourself. You have to be the one who looks at the evidence of your own transformation and concludes, without external validation, that it's sufficient, that you've changed enough to deserve some peace, that the person you've become has earned the right to stop being punished for what the earlier version of you did before you knew better. That is an act of enormous courage. It may not look like courage from the outside. From the outside, it might look like letting yourself off the hook. But you know the difference between avoiding accountability and genuinely releasing yourself from a sentence that's already been served. You've been accountable. You've carried the weight of your mistakes for years. You've allowed them to shape how you move through the world, how you treat people, how careful and deliberate you've tried to be since then. The accountability has been real. The change has been real. And now, in this silence, in this night, you're allowed to acknowledge both those things honestly and ask yourself whether the continued punishment still serves any purpose at all. Think about the specific person you may have hurt, the one whose face comes to you at night, the one connected to the mistake you find hardest to forgive yourself for. You've thought about what you'd say to them if you could. You've imagined explaining yourself, apologizing, trying to make them understand that you were struggling in ways you couldn't articulate at the time, that the harm you caused wasn't intentional, even if it was real, that you've thought about what you did far more than they probably realize. Maybe you did have that conversation. Maybe you apologized and they accepted it, or they didn't, or they said the words of acceptance without their eyes matching what their mouth said. Maybe they've moved on completely while you're still here in the dark, still revisiting the moment. Maybe they forgave you long ago and the only person still withholding forgiveness is you. Maybe you are the longest, most devoted holder of a grudge against yourself that has ever existed, carrying it long past the point when anyone else even remembers what happened. That's possible. That's more than possible. The harshest, most relentless judges of your life are almost never the people you wronged. They have their own lives, their own concerns, their own healing to attend to. The harshest judge has always been the voice inside you, the one that never rests, the one that never reaches a verdict of innocent, the one that reopens the case every night when the lights go out. You can retire that judge. You can. Not by denying the truth of what happened, but by recognizing that a judge who only prosecutes and never releases serves no one. Not justice, not healing, not growth, not you, not the person you hurt, just the abstract idea of perpetual punishment, which has never made anything better in the history of the world. Let's move now to something quieter, something that lives beneath the obvious wounds and the named mistakes and the faces you can put to specific moments of pain. Let's move toward the forgiveness that doesn't have a clear object. The forgiveness that isn't directed at a particular person or a particular event, but at life itself, at the way things turned out, at the distance between what you hoped for and what actually happened. You had dreams, real ones. not fantasies, not naive wishful thinking, but genuine visions of the life you were building and what it would look like when you arrived at this point. You imagined a version of this life, a version with certain people in it who aren't here, with certain achievements you expected to have reached by now but haven't, with a sense of peace and arrival and completion that you assumed would come automatically with age, and that has, in some ways, been slower to arrive than you expected. The gap between the imagined life and the actual life is its own kind of grief, not talked about enough, not acknowledged with the weight it deserves, because it doesn't have a clean story attached to it. No one specific wronged you to create that gap. It emerged from the accumulation of small divergences, choices made and not made, doors that closed, timing that was slightly off, luck that ran in the wrong direction at the wrong moment. The particular and unrepeatable combination of factors that shaped your actual life into something different from the one you planned. You've mourned this, probably in fragments, privately, without fully naming what you were mourning. You've had moments of driving somewhere familiar, or looking at old photographs, or hearing a song from a particular era and feeling the ache of what was and what almost was and what you thought would be. This is legitimate grief. It deserves to be acknowledged as such, not indulged endlessly, not allowed to collapse into bitterness, but genuinely acknowledged. You lost something real when the imagined life didn't arrive. You lost the person you expected to become. And that loss lives alongside all your other losses, quieter than most, but present always. Forgiving life for not going according to plan is perhaps the most sophisticated forgiveness of all. Because life isn't a person. You can't sit across from it and have the conversation. You can't explain how you felt. You can't receive an apology or an explanation. You can only arrive eventually at a kind of acceptance that isn't resignation, a kind of peace that isn't indifference, an acknowledgement that the life you actually lived, imperfect and divergent from the plan as it was, contained real beauty, real love, real moments of grace and connection and meaning that the imagined life might never have offered. The actual life is the only life. You know that. But knowing it and feeling it are different. And the night is where the feeling has room to breathe. In the silence, you can grieve the unlived life and then return gently to this one, to the weight of these blankets, to the familiar contours of this room, to the particular collection of experiences and relationships and hard-won understandings that belong to you alone, to the life that is genuinely, specifically, irreplaceably yours. There is no other life available to you. There never was. The imagined one was always only imaginary. This one is real, and real, however imperfect, is infinitely more valuable than imagined, because real is where love actually happens. Real is where growth actually occurs. Real is where the moments you'll carry forever were made, not in the life you planned, but in the one that actually unfolded with all its detours and disappointments and unexpected gifts. Breathe again, long and slow. Feel this moment as the real thing that it is. You are here, in this actual room, in this actual body, in this actual night. Everything that brought you here was real. Every detour was part of the root. Every loss shaped what you became. Every wound contributed to the person lying in this bed right now, who is, for all their complexity and imperfection, someone of genuine depth and substance. Someone who has lived fully enough to carry both joy and grief. Someone who understands things that can only be understood by living through them. Someone worthy of the peace that this night is offering. Now let's return to the deepest wound, the one you've been circling all this time, the one that has been present since we began. Quiet in the background, patient, waiting. You know what it is. You've always known what we were moving toward, the wound that changed the shape of everything, the hurt that didn't just cause pain, but altered your fundamental understanding of the world, of people, of what you were allowed to expect and trust and hope for. Maybe it was a betrayal so complete, it rewrote your understanding of someone you loved. Maybe it was a loss so sudden that the world never quite rearranged itself properly afterward. Maybe it was violence or violation or abandonment of the most devastating kind. Maybe it was a slow erosion rather than a single event. Years of something corrosive that wore down what it touched so gradually that by the time you recognized the damage, you couldn't quite trace it back to any single moment or person. You don't have to name it out loud. You don't have to tell anyone. Not tonight. Not ever if you choose not to. The night holds it. The silence holds it. And you've been holding it quietly for longer than most people would believe if you told them how long it's actually been. This wound is the one that taught you the most dangerous lesson. The one that revised your operating assumptions about how safe the world is, about how much you can open yourself to another person without risking everything, about what people are ultimately capable of on their worst days, when their own pain overrides their care for you. The lesson was true in a narrow sense. People are capable of great harm. The world is not unconditionally safe. Some trusts, once broken, cannot be fully restored. These things are real. You learned them from experience, which is the most convincing teacher. But the lesson calcified over time, the way learned lessons sometimes do. It stopped being knowledge and became a wall. It stopped being useful information and became a prison sentence. It said, if this happened once, it will happen again. If this person did this, all people will do this. If the world was unsafe then, the world is unsafe always. And so you adjusted your life accordingly. You built the architecture of your daily existence around the existence of that wound, around the need to never be that hurt again, around the absolute priority of protection over connection. And it worked. You protected yourself. You were never hurt in exactly that way again. The wall held. The fortress was secure. Nothing got through that you didn't explicitly allow. But nothing got through that you didn't explicitly allow. You hear the cost in that sentence. You feel it. The same architecture that kept out the catastrophic hurt also kept out the uncomplicated joy. The same distance that prevented another devastating loss also prevented the depth of connection that makes life feel meaningful. The same careful management of what you let in and what you keep out has made you safe, and also, in certain quiet moments, profoundly lonely in a way that has nothing to do with the people physically present in your life. You've been managing this trade-off for years. You've made your peace with it, mostly. You've told yourself it was wise, and in some ways it was. But tonight, in this silence, you're allowed to ask whether the original wound still requires quite the level of fortification you've maintained around it. Whether the defenses sized for the original threat are still necessary now, all these years later, in a life that is different in so many ways from the one in which the wound was first sustained. The person who hurt you then is not the same person as everyone you've encountered since. The circumstances that made that harm possible do not automatically exist in every relationship that follows. The version of you that was hurt then was less equipped to protect yourself, less aware, less healed, less able to read the warning signs and respond to them. You are not that version of yourself anymore. You are more capable of discernment now, more capable of seeing people clearly, more capable of choosing well and leaving early and trusting your own instincts about who is and isn't safe. Which means the wall can come down a little, not all the way, not tonight. Forgiveness of the deepest wound is not accomplished in a single evening's conversation with yourself, and you would be right to be suspicious of any process that claimed otherwise. But a brick can be removed. One brick. The decision to no longer let that old wound be the primary architect of how you live and love and trust and open yourself to the world going forward. One small adjustment to the wall. One tiny increase in the available light. That is enough for tonight. That is more than enough. That is, in fact, enormous. Because here is what you may not fully understand about your own healing. The forgiveness you've been doing tonight, this quiet internal reckoning in the dark, this honest accounting of what you've been carrying and why and at what cost. This is not passive. It is not simply lying in bed thinking about old pain. It is active healing work of the most fundamental kind. The kind that happens without witnesses, without applause, without anyone knowing it's occurring. The kind that is, for that very reason, the most authentic kind there is. You have been doing real work tonight. In this silence, in this bed, in this willingness to look at what you've been carrying without flinching away from it. This willingness is not small. Most people spend entire lifetimes avoiding exactly this kind of honest interior reckoning. They stay busy enough that the wounds never get a chance to surface. They surround themselves with enough noise that the silence never comes long enough to allow this kind of looking. They run from what you are sitting with tonight. You are not running. You are here. You are awake, or nearly so, in this quiet room, and you are doing the work. You are feeling the weight of what you've carried and asking whether all of it still needs carrying. You are looking at the people who hurt you with clear eyes, not to excuse them, but to release them from the position of power you've unconsciously maintained for them inside your own mind and heart. This is what healing looks like when it happens honestly. Not a sudden breakthrough, not a dramatic moment of clarity and release, just a quiet, late-night willingness to look directly at the truth of your own experience and begin slowly to make different choices about how you carry it forward. The silence around you right now is not empty. It is full of everything that is quietly right in your life. The breath moving through your body, the heartbeat that has kept its faithful rhythm through every difficulty you've ever faced, the memories of real connection, real love, real moments that were genuinely, completely good, the knowledge that you've survived everything life has brought to you so far, the evidence written across the whole of your lived experience that you are more resilient than you've given yourself credit for. Resilience is not the absence of being hurt. It's not being untouched by difficulty. Real resilience is being touched by everything, hurt by some of it, broken by a little of it, and continuing anyway. Getting back into bed every night, despite what the nights sometimes hold. Opening your eyes every morning and choosing to re-engage with a world that has, at various points, been unkind to you. Loving people despite the evidence that love involves risk. Trusting despite the evidence that trust is sometimes betrayed. Hoping despite the evidence that hope is sometimes disappointed. You have been doing that your entire life, every single day, without a certificate, without acknowledgement, without anyone necessarily knowing how much it costs you or how much courage it requires. You have been resilient in the most honest sense of that word for longer than you probably realize. And now, here in this night, the forgiveness you've been moving toward is available to you. Not as a destination you've finally reached, but as a direction you're choosing. Forgiveness as a compass heading, rather than a finished state. A choice to orient yourself toward release, rather than retention. Toward peace, rather than continued punishment. Toward the future, which is still open and still yours, rather than the past, which is finished and fixed and unable to be changed by any amount of revisiting. Let the people who hurt you be human, flawed, damaged, limited, struggling with their own unhealed wounds and unexamined patterns, capable of causing harm without full understanding of the harm they caused, not excused, not absolved of responsibility, but human as you are, as human as you've been in your own worst moments, as deserving of the understanding that you hope someone, somewhere, might extend to you for what you did at your worst. Let yourself be human too. Let the version of you that made mistakes be loved with the same complicated, qualified, honest love you'd offer anyone else who was doing their best with limited tools in difficult circumstances. Stop requiring perfection from a person who never had access to the instruction manual. Stop prosecuting someone who was always, in every moment, simply trying to survive, and occasionally, in that effort, causing damage they didn't fully mean and couldn't always prevent. You have been trying, in every version of yourself, in every era of your life, trying to love well, to live with integrity, to repair what you damaged, to become someone you could respect. The effort has been real. The intention has been genuine. The result has been imperfect, as all human results are imperfect, and that imperfection does not erase the effort or negate the intention or make you unworthy of the peace you're seeking tonight. Now let your breathing slow. Notice that it already has, Notice how your body has been listening to all of this, absorbing it, releasing what it could release, relaxing around what it's been holding. Your body understands things before your mind catches up. It's been unwinding this whole time, quietly, trusting the process even when your mind was still arguing with it. Your shoulders are softer now. Your hands are looser. The jaw that held so much tension at the beginning of this hour has let some of it go. The body knows. It knows when it's safe to let down. It knows when the work of the night has been honest enough that rest is finally possible. The silence has been doing its work. That's what silence does when you allow it. When you stop filling it with distraction and busyness and noise. When you let it be what it actually is, which is not emptiness, but presence. The presence of your own truest self, waiting patiently for you to stop running long enough to be found. You've been found tonight, by yourself, in this bed, in this dark, in this hour that asks nothing from you except your willingness to be honest and your courage to look directly at what you've been carrying and begin gently to set some of it down. The wounds are still there. They don't disappear in a single night, but they are lighter now than they were when you pulled the covers up. Something has shifted, something small and real and permanent. A door has been left slightly more open than it was before. A wall has lost one brick. A sentence that was never just has been quietly, privately commuted. The names that were loud in your mind an hour ago are quieter now. The faces that came uninvited have begun to recede. Not because they don't matter, not because what they represent isn't real, but because you've looked at them directly in the light of this honest night, and they've lost some of the power that darkness and avoidance gave them. What you face loses power over you. What you name becomes less able to control you. What you look at directly can no longer ambush you from behind. You have more peace available to you than you know. More than the accumulated weight of your history has allowed you to feel. More than the voices of self-criticism and unresolved grief have given you access to. That peace has always been there, underneath everything, patient and steady, waiting for a night exactly like this one. A night when you were tired enough to let your guard down, quiet enough to hear the truth, brave enough to look at what you've been carrying and begin the long, slow, deeply human work of letting it go. That work continues beyond tonight. It will continue in the days and weeks ahead, in small moments of choice, where you decide again whether to hold or to release, whether to revisit or to redirect, whether to identify with the wound or with the healing. Those choices accumulate. They build on each other, and they build on tonight, on this particular hour of honesty in the dark, on this willingness to begin. You've begun. That matters enormously. Most of the work of forgiveness is simply beginning, deciding that the cost of carrying is higher than the cost of releasing, deciding that you deserve peace more than the wound deserves tending, deciding in the quiet of this particular night that the person you are going forward will be shaped more by your healing than by your hurt. You've made that decision tonight, in this silence, without ceremony, without witnesses, without anyone knowing it happened except you. That is enough, more than enough. It is, in fact, everything. So rest now. Let the night hold what you've done here. Let the silence continue its quiet work while you sleep. Let the healing you've begun tonight settle deeper into the places where it's needed, moving through you the way warmth moves through a body, coming in from the cold, slowly, completely, into every place that was waiting for it. You are allowed to sleep without those names echoing. You are allowed to rest without the old verdicts playing on repeat. You are allowed to close your eyes without bracing for the ambush of memories you've been fending off. Tonight, you looked at them directly. You acknowledged them honestly. You gave them the attention they've been demanding for years. And now they can rest too. The bed is warm. The room is quiet. The night outside is deep and still and full of the same silence that is full inside you now. The silence that is not emptiness, but peace. Not absence, but arrival. Not loneliness, but the profound and trustworthy solitude of a person who has, tonight, come home to themselves. You are home, in yourself, in this bed, in this dark, honest, healing night. Rest.